My name is Amelia, and I will never forget the moment my world collapsed only to discover a strength I never knew I had. It was a gray morning, the kind that weighs heavy on your chest. My father had just been laid to rest, and the house was still filled with the scent of lilies and the muffled voices of neighbors who came to pay their respects. I was numb, exhausted, and clinging to fragments of him, his voice, his laugh, the way he always reminded me to stand tall. But before the flowers from his funeral could even wilt, my husband Jack did something that cut deeper than grief itself. He barged into the living room, inheritance documents in his hand, and without a shred of hesitation, he announced, "I've decided. The $3 million your father left will be divided between me and my mother." I froze. At first I thought he was joking, that grief had warped his words. But then he grinned a sickening, triumphant grin and waved the papers like a trophy. My heart raced. My hands trembled. And then came the words that shattered me. "Kelly, don't be too greedy. This money will finally let me quit my job. I should thank that doddering old man." Doddering old man. He was talking about my father, the man who built a clinic from nothing, the man who saved lives, the man who raised me single-handedly after my mother's sudden death. Something inside me cracked. Anger surged up my throat like fire, and for a split second I wanted to scream, to throw the papers in his face. But my voice came out small, almost pleading. Are you talking about my dad?" Jack didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. Instead, his mother, her heavy makeup glowing even under the dim light, clapped her hands together in delight. $3 million, isn't it wonderful? Now we can buy a new car and go shopping every weekend." Their laughter filled the room, echoing against the silence of my grief. My father's funeral wasn't even 24 hours behind us, and they were already spending his life's work in their heads. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. Inside, I was screaming. I was the one who had endured years of household chores while Jack lounged in front of the television. I was the one who quietly handed his mother cash whenever she demanded it, even when our bills piled up. And now, after everything, they dared to insult the man who gave me everything. I wanted to explode, to throw them both out, to claw back every ounce of dignity they'd stolen from me. But I knew if I lost control now, they would twist my anger into weakness. So I forced a smile. I forced the words through clenched teeth. "Sure, feel free to use the money however you and your mother want." Jack beamed as if he'd won a prize. His mother nodded approvingly, leaning back with a smug smile. Inside, though, my rage was a storm. That day, something inside me shifted. I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about control, about respect, about whether I would let them trample the last memory of my father. And as I stood there pretending to agree, a quiet promise burned in my chest. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. When I replay that moment in my head, I still feel the sting of betrayal, as if it just happened yesterday. Jack stood there with his mother, both of them buzzing with excitement, their voices overlapping like children on Christmas morning. They spoke of new cars, designer bags, vacations by the beach, and shopping trips that would never end. My father's funeral was barely over, and yet they celebrated as if they had won the lottery. But what made my stomach turn wasn't just their greed, it was their disrespect. Jack leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, and said again with that arrogant smirk, "Kelly, don't be too greedy. Your father was just a doddering old man, but at least he left us something useful. I can finally quit my job and live like I deserve." The room went silent for me. My ears rang. I heard the words, but could barely process them. That doddering old man was my father, the man who built his career as a doctor brick by brick, who saved hundreds of lives, who spent sleepless nights working for patients who couldn't afford to pay. To hear Jack degrade him like that, it was a knife to the chest. My instinct was to scream, to slam my hands on the table and throw them out of my house. But I forced myself to remain still. My father had taught me restraint. He had taught me that sometimes silence carries more power than shouting. So I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, and I let Jack and his mother talk themselves into a frenzy. Jack's mother, her makeup thick and her perfume cloying, leaned forward and tapped the documents as if they were already hers. "Jack, this is wonderful. You've made the right decision. You and I will finally live comfortably. No more sacrifices, no more penny pinching. I nodded faintly, even though my chest burned with rage. I could see the future. They imagined a future where my inheritance, my father's legacy, became their playground. And in that moment, I understood something important. If I let them, they would take everything from me. Not just the money, my dignity, my freedom, my father's memory. So I smiled, a smile I didn't feel, a smile that hid the storm raging inside. And I whispered, "Sure. Use the money however you and your mother like." They both froze for a second, surprised by my calm agreement, then erupted into laughter. Jack slapped my shoulder as if I were his business partner rather than his wife. His mother grinned satisfied and said, "That's the spirit, Kelly. Quick to agree. Now make sure you keep working hard, because I don't want our savings to go down. Keep earning, and we'll handle the rest." I excused myself and went upstairs, where I finally let the tears spill. I sat on the floor of my bedroom shaking, clutching the memory of my father like a lifeline. His voice echoed in my head, "Kelly, don't endure what you cannot bear. Choose happiness." That night, lying in bed while Jack snored loudly beside me, I stared at the ceiling and made a vow. If they thought I was weak, if they thought I would hand over my father's legacy without a fight, they were gravely mistaken. And yet, even as I plotted silently, part of me longed for a connection, for someone out there to understand this pain. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever faced a moment where the people closest to you revealed who they truly were, where grief was twisted into greed and love became nothing more than a mask for self-interest? If you have, share your story in the comments. I know I'm not the only one, and your voice matters here. Because what happened next tested every limit of my patience and every shred of loyalty I thought I owed to my husband. I suppose I should pause here and tell you who I really am. My name is Amelia. I am 38 years old, and until recently, I thought I had everything under control. I grew up in a small town where my parents, both doctors, ran a respected clinic. I was their only child, and they showered me with love and encouragement. From the time I was little, my father would put a stethoscope around my neck and joke, "One day you'll carry this further than I ever did." But life had other plans. I didn't become a doctor. Instead, I went to the School of Pharmacy and later secured a solid job at a pharmaceutical company in New York. My parents were disappointed at first, but they never let that change their pride in me. They supported my decision and believed I would still make a difference. 10 years ago, everything changed. My mother died in an accident, leaving me and my father shattered. He buried himself in work while I tried to balance my grief with my career. It was during this vulnerable time that I met Jack. We were introduced through a mutual friend, and at first, he seemed like exactly what I needed. Steady, attentive, someone who stood by me while my world collapsed. Jack's attention felt like oxygen. He took me out for simple dinners, listened to me cry without judgment, and promised that with him I would never feel alone. When he proposed 2 years later, I said yes, without hesitation. My father was relieved. He hugged Jack firmly and said, "Please take care of her. She deserves happiness." Jack stood tall, looked him in the eye, and replied, "I promise I'll make her happy." At that moment, I believed every word. I remember feeling safe for the first time since my mother's death. Standing next to Jack, I imagined a future where grief would fade, replaced by laughter, stability, and maybe children. I thought my story was turning toward light again. The week after our engagement, we visited Jack's family. That was the first time I sensed the darkness lurking beneath the surface. His mother, glamorous but sharp-tongued, sized me up with narrowed eyes. She leaned back on her sofa and muttered, "She's older, plain, not exactly the type I pictured for Jack. Wouldn't a younger, prettier girl be better?" The air froze around me. I expected Jack to defend my character, to praise my heart, my resilience. Instead, he straightened in his chair and said, "Mom, do you know M Pharmaceuticals? Amelia works there. And her father is a doctor, he owns his own clinic." His mother's expression shifted instantly. The judgment vanished, replaced by a smile too wide to be genuine. "Well, why didn't you say so earlier? That changes everything. I approve." I forced a polite laugh, but inside my stomach twisted. It wasn't me she accepted. It was my background, my family's reputation, my father's money. Jack looked at me with pride in his eyes, believing he had rescued the situation. He didn't realize he had just exposed what mattered most to him and his mother. That night, lying in bed at my father's house, I replayed her words over and over. Something inside me whispered that this marriage wasn't built on love alone. It was tied to what I represented, what I could offer. But I silenced that voice. I told myself I was overthinking, that grief had made me paranoid. I wanted so badly to believe Jack was different, that he truly loved me. Looking back, that was my first mistake, the first red flag I chose to ignore. And before I move on, I want to hear from you. Have you ever ignored a red flag because you wanted to believe in someone so badly? Did it come back to hurt you later? Leave your story in the comments. Your experience might help someone else who is struggling with the same blindness I had. Because as you'll see, those early doubts weren't paranoia at all. They were warnings, and I would pay a steep price for ignoring them. When my mother passed away, a part of me shattered forever. I was 28 at the time, still young enough to believe that the world was fair, still naive enough to think that tragedy happened to other people. The accident came without warning, ripping her out of my life in a single afternoon. My father and I sat together in the quiet of our family home, staring at the empty chair where she used to read the newspaper every morning. We didn't speak much. What words could possibly fill a silence like that? It was in those heavy months of grief that Jack became my anchor. He was not extraordinary by any traditional measure. He worked in the food and beverage industry, earned an average salary, and had little ambition beyond surviving each day. But in my broken state, I didn't crave ambition or wealth. I craved consistency. I craved a hand to hold in the dark. And Jack offered that. He stayed with me when I didn't want to leave the house. He ordered takeout when I couldn't bring myself to cook. He sat quietly while I cried myself to sleep. And in those moments, I told myself that this must be love, the kind that holds you together when you're falling apart. 2 years later, when Jack got down on one knee with a modest ring, my father's eyes filled with tears. He clasped Jack's hand firmly and said, "Thank you for supporting her when I could not. Please keep making her happy." Jack straightened his shoulders like a soldier and declared, "I will." I remember standing beside him, believing every word, thinking I had finally found my safe harbor. But safe harbors sometimes hide storms. A week after our engagement, my father gave us the news as a wedding gift. He would transfer ownership of an apartment in a luxury New York building. I was stunned by his generosity. "Dad, it's too much," I whispered, but he only smiled. "You deserve stability. Consider it my blessing for your new life." When I told Jack, his eyes lit up. Our own apartment in New York City. "Amelia, this is incredible." He hugged me tightly, but there was something in his expression, a gleam I couldn't quite read. I brushed it off. At the time, I thought it was excitement. Later, I would realize it was something darker. We moved in after the wedding, and at first everything seemed fine. I threw myself into decorating, choosing soft colors and warm lights to make it feel like home. Jack seemed grateful, enthusiastic, even as we planned our future together. But beneath the smiles, I felt small cracks forming. Jack had lived with his mother until marriage, and it showed. He didn't know how to cook, how to clean, how to do laundry. He would leave his clothes on the floor, dirty dishes on the table, trash uncollected for days. At first, I laughed it off. He'll learn, I told myself. But weeks turned into months, and the pattern never changed. One night, exhausted after a 10-hour shift, I came home to find the kitchen a disaster, crumbs everywhere. Pizza boxes stacked, empty soda cans rolling on the floor. Jack sat on the couch playing video games, barely looking up when I walked in. I asked him gently to help me share the chores. His answer, "You're better at it than me. Why should I do something I'll just mess up?" That was the first time I felt the weight of our imbalance pressed down on me. The first year of our marriage became a blur of double shifts, long hours at the office, followed by endless chores at home. I told myself this was temporary, that love meant sacrifice. But deep down, a small voice whispered, "This isn't partnership. This is servitude. Still, I silenced that voice. I wanted to believe in him. I wanted to believe that grief had led me to someone who would heal me. Looking back, I realized I confused comfort with love. Jack had been there when I was at my lowest, and I mistook his presence for devotion. I ignored the signs, the laziness, the entitlement, the way his mother's approval was bought with my family's name and money. Before I continue, let me ask you, have you ever mistaken someone's convenience for love? Have you ever held onto a relationship not because it was good, but because it was familiar, because it filled a void in your life? Share your story in the comments. You might help someone else recognize their own truth before it's too late. Because as you'll see, those cracks in my marriage weren't just cracks. They were fault lines. And eventually, they would break wide open. So, I should have trusted my instincts the first time I stepped into Jack's childhood home. His mother greeted me with a sharp smile, her lips painted crimson, her jewelry glittering in the dim light. She looked me up and down the way a buyer inspects merchandise. "Marriage, huh?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Jack, she's older, isn't she plain too? Wouldn't a younger, prettier girl be better for you?" The words hit me like a slap. My heart pounded in my chest, waiting for Jack to defend me, to tell her I was more than enough. But instead, he leaned forward, his voice eager, almost proud. "Mom, you know M Pharmaceuticals, right? Amelia works there, and her father, he's a doctor. He runs his own practice." I wanted him to say something about my heart, my strength, the nights I cried in his arms. Instead, he sold me like a resume. His mother's face transformed instantly. The sneer disappeared, replaced by an approving smile. She clasped my hand as if she had known me forever. "Oh, Jack, why didn't you tell me something so important? That changes everything. I'm happy to welcome you, Amelia." Her grip was too tight, her words too rehearsed. I smiled politely, but inside I felt cold. She hadn't accepted me. She had accepted what I represented. My family name, my father's success, the money and reputation attached to me. Jack beamed, oblivious to the knot in my stomach. For him, this was victory. For me, it was the first warning sign that my place in his family was conditional, dependent on what I could provide. That night, lying awake beside Jack, I thought about her words. Older, plain, not good enough. I told myself I didn't care what she thought, but in truth, the seed of doubt had been planted. A seed that would grow into something darker over the years. The wedding moved forward quickly, and despite my unease, I convinced myself that love would smooth the rough edges. My father was overjoyed. "She has someone now," he told his friends. "I don't have to worry anymore." But deep down, I felt a shadow. I felt as though I had stepped into a game where the rules were written by someone else, rules I didn't understand yet. Soon after the wedding, my father gave us a gift that would change everything. He transferred ownership of a luxury apartment in New York City to me. I remember staring at the deed, overwhelmed. "Dad, this is too much," I whispered. He smiled, tired lines around his eyes, softening. "You deserve stability. Consider it my blessing." When I told Jack, he nearly jumped with joy. Our own place in New York. "Amelia, this is incredible." He kissed me with passion. But again, I saw that flicker in his eyes, the same gleam he had when his mother approved of me. Excitement, yes, but something else too. Calculation. We moved in, and for a moment, I believed the gift would anchor our marriage, give us a foundation to build on. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized the foundation was already cracked. Jack had never lived on his own before. He didn't know how to cook, how to clean, how to wash a single shirt. Dishes piled up in the sink, clothes littered the floor, trash overflowed from bins while he sat on the couch watching television. At first I laughed it off. He'll learn, I told myself, but he never did. When I asked him gently to help, his answer was always the same. "You're better at it than me. Why should I do something I'll just mess up?" I wanted to believe it was harmless. That love meant compromise. But already I felt the weight pressing down. My career was demanding, my grief still raw, and yet I carried every burden at home alone. Looking back, I see it now. His mother's quick approval. Jack's pride in showing off my family's reputation, the way chores and responsibilities fell squarely on me. It was all connected. I wasn't just a wife. I was a provider, a tool. Before I go further, I want to ask you, Have you ever felt accepted, not for who you are, but for what you bring to the table? Maybe your money, your job, your family name. How did it feel to realize the acceptance wasn't truly about you? Share your thoughts below, because stories like this aren't rare. They're warnings we need to talk about. I silenced my doubts back then, convincing myself it was just the beginning of marriage. But in truth, I was already on a dangerous path. A path where love was conditional, respect was absent, and sacrifice was demanded only from me. Akaim. For a while, I held on to the illusion that our new apartment would be the start of something beautiful. My father had given it to me as a wedding gift, and I imagined Jack and I creating a warm, peaceful home together. I filled the rooms with light-colored furniture, fresh flowers, and photographs of my parents, hoping to keep their presence close. At first, Jack seemed thrilled. He bragged to his friends about living in a luxury building in New York. He smiled when he walked through the lobby, proud of the doorman who greeted us by name. But behind the surface, things were not what I had hoped. Jack had never truly lived independently. His mother had always done everything for him. He didn't know how to cook, how to clean, or even how to operate a washing machine. Dirty dishes piled up in the sink clothes were left on the floor. Trash bins overflowed while he lounged on the couch with a beer in hand. At first I told myself it was new. He would learn. Every couple had to find their rhythm. But weeks turned into months and nothing changed. I found myself racing home after 10-hour shifts, exhausted, only to face another mountain of housework. My evenings became a blur of laundry scrubbing and cooking, while Jack scrolled on his phone or played video games. One night I finally reached my breaking point. I sat down across from him, my voice steady but my hands trembling. "Jack, I can't do this alone. I'm drowning. I need you to help with the chores." He didn't even look up from his screen. "Amelia, I'm tired from work too. You're better at it. Why should I do something I'll just mess up?" The casual dismissal cut me to the bone. It wasn't just laziness, it was entitlement. He didn't want to try because in his mind, my labor was simply expected. I felt invisible, unappreciated, trapped. Still, I told myself to endure. Love required sacrifice. Maybe he would change. Maybe time would soften the rough edges. But in truth, the weight of resentment was already piling up. And then there was his mother. At first, I tried to win her over. I sent her gifts for Mother's Day, once a beautiful scarf I picked out with care. But instead of gratitude, she called me the next day, her voice sharp with disdain. "This scarf isn't from a famous brand. How absurd to send me something so cheap." I was stunned. I tried to explain that it was high quality, but she wouldn't listen. She demanded only luxury brands, things that screamed status. When I told Jack, hoping for support, he shrugged. "It's just how she is. Do what she says." From that point on, we started giving her cash. At first, it was small amounts, but over time, her visits grew more frequent, her demands bolder. She would come into our home, sit at our table, and find excuses to ask for money. Jack never resisted. He smiled, pulled out his wallet, and handed her whatever she wanted. Meanwhile, our finances strained. Even though I earned a good salary, Jack's income was modest, and with his mother draining us, I had to dip into savings just to make ends meet. The resentment I felt began to shift. It wasn't just about chores anymore. It was about loyalty. Whose side was he on, mine or his mother's? But still I endured. I told myself she's his mother. She's important to him. If I love him, I can bear this. That was my mistake. I confused endurance with strength. Looking back, I realized my father had tried to protect me. He gave me that apartment so I would never feel insecure. He wanted me to be safe, to have a place that was truly mine. But I had let Jack and his mother turn it into their playground. Before I go on, I want to ask you something. Have you ever sacrificed your peace just to keep a relationship together? Have you ever told yourself to endure when every part of you screamed to stop? If so, leave your story in the comments. Someone out there may need to hear it, because what came next would push me beyond endurance. It wasn't just chores or money anymore. It became about betrayal, about survival, and about finally choosing myself. Year after year, the cracks in my marriage widened. By our 5th anniversary, I could no longer ignore what was happening. Jack's mother had grown bolder, and her visits were no longer occasional. They were constant. She would come into our apartment unannounced, criticize the way I arranged the furniture, complain about the meals I cooked, and always find a way to bring up money. It started small, a few $100s here and there, then it became thousands. She had an endless list of excuses: medical bills, car repairs, birthday gifts for relatives I had never met. Every time she asked, Jack gave without hesitation. He smiled, pulled out cash, or wired money instantly, as though he was proud to provide for her. I felt like an outsider in my own home. I was working long hours, keeping up with all the housework, and now watching our savings disappear into his mother's hands. I tried to reason with him. Jack, we can't keep doing this. We barely cover our expenses as it is. We need to save for our future. He brushed me off every time. She's my mother, Amelia. What's mine is hers. Stop being selfish. Selfish. That word burned. Was it selfish to want security? To want a husband who prioritized his marriage over his mother's demands? I thought marriage meant building a life together, not financing his mother's greed. By the 8th year, things had only gotten worse. His mother had practically moved in. She would sleep on our couch, fill the fridge with food I never ate, and take over my kitchen, as if it belonged to her. And whenever I expressed frustration, Jack turned it against me. Why are you always picking fights? She's family. She deserves respect. Respect. I gave it again and again. But respect without boundaries becomes exploitation. I was drowning in it. The breaking point came one evening when I opened our bank account to pay the bills. The numbers didn't add up. We were supposed to have at least $100,000 in savings. Instead, the balance was a fraction of that. My stomach dropped. I confronted Jack, and he laughed. Why are you panicking? My father-in-law left you plenty. $3 million is coming our way. Spending a little now won't matter. I stared at him in disbelief. My father was alive, but fighting cancer. The inheritance wasn't even real yet. It was something I didn't want to think about because it meant losing him. And here, Jack was already counting money that hadn't been passed on, already planning a life funded by my father's death. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with rage. I thought about my mother, about how she had raised me to be independent, resilient. I thought about my father, about how he had built everything from scratch, never asking anyone for a dime. And then I thought about myself, how I had allowed Jack and his mother to treat me like a servant, like a bank account, like a tool. The realization was painful, but it was also freeing. I didn't have to keep enduring. I could choose differently. And let me ask you, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent for the sake of keeping peace? Or would you have stood up and demanded respect? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your answer might give strength to someone else facing the same battle. Because the storm was coming. My father's illness was reaching its final stage. Soon grief would crash over me again. But this time I would also be forced to see Jack and his mother for who they truly were. The question was no longer whether I could endure. The question was, how much longer would I allow them to strip away my dignity before I finally chose myself? It was around our 8th year of marriage when my world shifted again. My father called me unexpectedly one afternoon, his voice soft but steady. He asked me to meet him at his clinic, and though his tone was calm, something in it made my chest tighten. When I arrived, he was sitting by the window, the late sunlight spilling across his face. He looked older, frailer. Amelia, he began, taking my hand in his. There is something I must tell you. My heart sank before he even spoke the words. I have cancer. It's advanced. The doctors say treatment won't help now. The room spun. My throat closed up. Dad? No. There has to be something. There must be another option. Tears blurred my vision, but he only stroked my hair gently the same way he did when I was a child. This is fate, my dear. We must accept it. I broke down in his arms, sobbing until I couldn't breathe. The idea of losing him, my last parent, my anchor, was unbearable. From that day on, my life became a juggling act. I balanced my demanding job, endless household chores, and now trips back and forth to the hospital. I wanted to be by his side for every moment to show him he wasn't alone. I asked Jack for support, for compassion, But his response was chilling in its indifference. Well, it's tough, he said casually, but please do your best. That was it. No offers to help. No presence at the hospital. He visited my father once, just once, and then retreated back into his comfort. I was left to carry the weight alone. At night, I would collapse into bed, my body aching from exhaustion. Jack never reached for me, never asked how I was holding up. Instead, he would complain about dinner being late or the laundry not folded. I wanted to scream to tell him that I was drowning, but I saved my energy for my father. One evening, as I sat beside my father's hospital bed, he turned to me suddenly. "Amelia, how is your marriage with Jack?" The question stunned me. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I thought about Jack's coldness, his mother's constant demands, the loneliness that clung to me even while married. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My silence told him everything. He squeezed my hand. "You don't have to endure. Think about your happiness. Don't chain yourself to suffering. You won't face hardship after I'm gone. I've made sure of that." Tears spilled down my cheeks. His words pierced me, not only because they revealed his care, but because they mirrored the truth I had been burying. I didn't have to stay in this marriage. I didn't have to give away my life for someone who didn't value me. For months I lived in a blur of fear and sorrow. Every time I walked into the hospital room, I tried to memorize my father's smile, his laugh, even the way he adjusted his glasses. I clung to each detail, knowing our time was running out. 3 months later, the inevitable came. He passed away quietly, his hands still in mine. I sat there long after the monitors went silent, unable to let go. He was gone, and with him went the last piece of my family. I arranged the funeral alone. Friends and colleagues came to offer support, but Jack was indifferent. He didn't help with preparations, didn't comfort me as I wept. He stood at the service, detached, as though he were attending a stranger's farewell. His mother, too, showed up, her eyes scanning the room like she was calculating who was worth impressing. Standing at the graveside, I promised my father I would honor his words. I would not endure what I could not bear. I would choose happiness, no matter the cost. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been at a crossroads where grief forced you to see the truth about someone you loved? Did loss reveal their real face? Share your story in the comments. You may give strength to someone else who feels trapped in silence. What I didn't know then was how quickly my father's warning would prove true. His death not only opened the door to sorrow, it also set the stage for betrayal so blatant it would ignite the fire I had been holding back for years. The days after my father's funeral felt like I was moving through fog. My body functioned, but my heart was numb. I went through the motions, greeting guests, signing paperwork, making arrangements, yet inside I was collapsing. My father had been my last anchor, and now I was untethered. 2 days later, I received a call from a lawyer. His voice was calm, professional, but the words shook me. "Your father left a detailed estate. After taxes, you will inherit over $3 million. I nearly dropped the phone. My father, always humble, had never spoken of his wealth. I knew about his medical practice, but I hadn't realized how much he had invested in real estate. My heart swelled with grief and gratitude. Even in death, he had found a way to protect me, to make sure I wouldn't suffer. The lawyer gave me documents to review. I carried them home, set them on my desk, and stared at them for hours. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I dozed off on the couch. When I awoke, I heard laughter, light, excited laughter that didn't belong in a house draped in mourning. I sat up and froze. Jack and his mother were standing in the living room, the inheritance documents spread across the table. Jack's face was glowing with joy, his eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Amelia, well done," he said smugly. "What are you doing?" I snapped, leaping to my feet. "Those papers are private. How dare you?" But before I could finish, his mother clapped her hands together. $3 million? Isn't that amazing, Jack? Now we can finally live comfortably. New cars, shopping sprees, fine dining. This is our time. Our time, as if she had earned a single cent of it. Jack looked at me, his grin almost manic. "I've already decided. I'll divide the inheritance between me and Mom. Don't be greedy, Amelia. This is our chance to live big. I can quit my job and finally relax. We have to thank your father even if he was just a doddering old man." The words hit me like ice water. Doddering old man, that was how he referred to my father, the man whose funeral we had just left, the man who had trusted him with my happiness. I felt heat rising in my chest, my hands curling into fists. "Are you talking about my dad?" I asked through clenched teeth. Jack shrugged as though it didn't matter. His mother leaned back smug. "That's the spirit, Amelia. Don't resist. Just hand it over. And keep working. Of course, we don't want the savings to shrink." In that moment, something inside me cracked wide open. The grief, the exhaustion, the years of carrying the weight of this marriage. It all boiled into one truth. They saw me as nothing more than a bank account, a maid, a tool. I forced a smile, swallowing the scream clawing up my throat. "Sure," I whispered. "Use the money however you and your mother like." They believed me. They celebrated. They laughed and planned their extravagant future, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, tears burning my eyes. My father's last words echoed in my memory. "You don't have to endure. Choose happiness." For the first time, I let myself imagine a life without Jack. A life free from his mother's greed, his dismissive smirks, his endless demands. I felt fear, yes, but also a spark of something stronger, determination. And here's where I pause to tell you, this was the moment the story truly shifted. You might think grief broke me, but in truth, it lit a fire inside me. Because what Jack and his mother didn't know was that I was already planning, already watching, already preparing. If you want to know how I turned their greed against them, stay with me. The next part will show you just how far I was willing to go. The weeks that followed were surreal, almost like living in a nightmare where the villains didn't even bother to hide. Jack quit his job within days, strutting around the apartment as if he were a king who had finally claimed his throne. His mother practically moved in hauling suitcases and filling my closets with luxury shopping bags. Every morning they left together on their little adventures, designer boutiques, fine restaurants, spas. They returned in the evenings carrying bags of clothes, boxes of jewelry, and bottles of champagne, their laughter spilling through the halls before the door even opened. Meanwhile, I was left to pick up the pieces. The housework became overwhelming. Piles of dishes in the sink, laundry tossed on the floor, trash bags abandoned in corners because in their eyes I was the maid. I worked all day, then came home to clean up their chaos, listening to them brag about the exclusive restaurants they had tried. One evening, Jack leaned back in his chair, patting his stomach after a lavish dinner. "The 3-star restaurant wasn't as good as I expected," he said casually, as if he were a food critic. His mother nodded, pursing her lips. "Yes, it was underwhelming. We'll try the 5-star one next week." I stood silently scrubbing the plates, my hands trembling. My savings, $100,000 I had carefully built over the years, was evaporating. Jack withdrew money from our joint account as if it were endless. When I confronted him, his response was always the same. "Why are you panicking? $3 million is coming soon. Spending now is no big deal." I wanted to scream, to remind him that the inheritance was mine, that my father had entrusted it to me. But instead, I swallowed my fury. I knew I needed patience. Every word he spoke, every dollar he spent, only strengthened the case I was building in my mind. Then came the final insult. One morning, I watched from the doorway as Jack and his mother packed suitcases. Colorful shirts, sandals, beachwear. Jack turned to me, grinning. "We're going to Hawaii for a week. You'll be fine here, right?" I blinked. Hawaii without me. His mother smirked. "You should stay home, Amelia. Someone has to look after the place. Don't worry, we'll bring back a souvenir." They walked out the door without a hint of shame, leaving me standing in the silent apartment, alone, abandoned. For the first time in years, I felt something sharp and alive cut through the fog of despair. It was anger, but not the kind that burns you from the inside. This was cold, precise, a fire I could control. That week, while they lounged on sandy beaches and posted smiling photos online, I got to work. I changed the locks on the apartment. I transferred the remaining $50,000 from our joint account into my own, ensuring it would be recognized as part of marital property division. And most importantly, I prepared the papers, the divorce petition, that would finally sever the chains binding me to them. By the time they returned from Hawaii, I was no longer the Amelia who cowered in silence. I was ready. And I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? If your partner not only betrayed you, but dragged their family into your life to exploit you, would you have stayed silent, or would you have drawn the line? Share your thoughts in the comments, because someone listening tonight might need your courage to finally take action. Because the confrontation was coming, Jack and his mother would soon discover that the woman they treated like a servant had a strength they never saw coming. And when I stood before them with the truth, their empire of greed would collapse in a single moment. The day they returned from Hawaii is burned into my memory. I was sitting in the living room with the windows open, the breeze carrying in the faint hum of city traffic. Then came the pounding at the door, loud, insistent, furious. I walked calmly to the intercom and pressed the button. The screen lit up, and there they were. Jack and his mother, both dressed in gaudy aloha shirts, their skin bronzed from days on the beach. They were dragging suitcases, their faces twisted with confusion. "Amelia," Jack shouted, pounding on the door. "Why isn't this opening? What's going on?" I leaned closer to the microphone, my voice even and cold. "It won't open because I changed the locks." For a moment, silence hung in the air. His mother's jaw dropped, her heavily painted face contorting with rage. "You did what?" Jack's eyes bulged. "Don't be ridiculous. Open this door right now." "I don't think so," I replied, keeping my tone calm. "But if you want to talk, there's a cafe nearby. Go there and I'll meet you." They screamed, cursed, threatened, but eventually their shouting faded. I watched through the camera as they hauled their bags down the street, defeated for the first time. When I arrived at the cafe, they were waiting. Jack's arms were crossed, his face red, his mother clutching her purse like it was a weapon. "What is this about?" Jack demanded the moment I sat down. "Did you really change the locks?" "Yes," I said simply, "because you don't live in that apartment anymore. You need to leave." His mother gasped, her voice rising. "You can't just kick us out. That place belongs to our family now." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my bag and slid it across the table. Jack snatched it up, scanning it quickly, his face drained of color. "This is a divorce petition?" "Yes," I answered. My voice didn't shake, though my heart raced. "I've already filled it out. All that's missing is your signature." Jack's hands trembled as he dropped the paper onto the table. His mother sputtered in disbelief. "Amelia, why would you do this after everything we've shared?" "Shared," I cut her off, my tone sharp as glass. "You spent my savings, treated me like a servant, and insulted my father. You shared nothing but greed." Jack leaned forward, trying to regain control. "Fine, Amelia. If you want a divorce, then fine, but don't think you can keep everything. Half of your father's inheritance belongs to me. That's how divorce works." I let the silence hang for a beat, then leaned in closer, my eyes steady. "You're wrong. Inheritance is considered separate property. It's not subject to division in a divorce." For a moment they both froze, blinking in shock. Then Jack fumbled with his phone, his fingers shaking as he searched desperately. His mother hovered over his shoulder, her lips moving soundlessly. Finally, his face went pale as he read the words aloud. "Property inherited by one spouse is considered separate. It can't be divided." His mother snatched the phone, her eyes darting across the screen before she slammed it down. "No, that can't be right. This money is ours." I sat back, letting them stew in the truth. For the first time, I wasn't the one trembling. They were. Jack's voice cracked. "Amelia, please, don't do this. I don't have a job, no savings. How will I survive without you?" I looked at him, and in that moment I felt nothing. No pity, no love, just clarity. "That's not my problem, Jack. You made your choices. Now live with them." And I want to pause here to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have shown mercy to a man who betrayed you? Or would you have walked away without looking back? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the hardest part of a story isn't the betrayal, it's deciding whether to forgive it. That day in the cafe, the balance of power shifted. For years they had controlled me with demands, guilt, and manipulation. But now the truth was mine, and they couldn't touch it. Jack's hands shook as he slid the divorce petition back across the table. His mother's face was flushed, her lipstick smeared at the edges from shouting. They looked less like the confident schemers who had once strutted through my apartment and more like cornered animals. Jack tried to recover, leaning forward with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You think you're clever, Amelia. Fine, keep the inheritance. But at least we still have the joint account. There should be more than $50,000 left. That's mine too. His mother nodded quickly, her voice shrill. Yes, we'll take that. Transfer it to us now and maybe we'll sign your papers. I tilted my head, almost pitying their desperation. You mean the $50,000 that used to be in the joint account? Jack frowned. Used to be? What are you talking about? I pulled my phone from my purse and tapped the screen. It's gone. I moved it into my personal account. It's legally part of the property division and it belongs to me. The color drained from his face. His smirk vanished. You can't just do that. He fumbled with his phone, opening the banking app. His mother leaned over his shoulder, her breath ragged. Then came the silence, heavy and suffocating. The balance was 0. His mother gasped, clutching her chest. This can't be happening. Jack, tell her she can't do this. Jack's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. Amelia, think about us. We built a life together. You can't just take everything and leave us with nothing. I leaned in, my tone calm, almost gentle. No, Jack. I built a life. You drained it. You treated me like a maid, like a wallet, like a burden. And you insulted the only man who ever truly protected me. That was the last straw. His eyes darted wildly, searching for a way out. Then he tried one last card, pity. Please, Amelia, don't divorce me. I have no job, no savings. How will I survive? How will Mom survive? I let the words hang in the air. Once they would have pierced me, guilted me into silence. But not anymore. I had lived too many years with their hands in my pockets and their scorn in my ears. You'll survive, I said flatly. You'll work like everyone else. You'll take responsibility for the choices you made. His mother's eyes burned with fury. You ungrateful woman. After everything Jack has done for you. I cut her off. What he's done. He abandoned me when my father was dying. He left me alone to grieve. He squandered my savings and treated me like a servant. If that's what you call love, then I don't want it. For the first time, they fell silent. Jack lowered his head, his shoulders sagging while his mother sat frozen, her lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. And here is where the story pivots, where everything you thought was certain collapses. They believed the inheritance was their golden ticket. They believed I was weak, but they were wrong. That moment in the cafe was the beginning of their downfall. They didn't know it yet, but the walls were already closing in. Their debts, their greed, their arrogance, they would all come crashing down. And I would finally walk away free. Before I move to the next part, let me leave you with this thought. Have you ever seen someone so blinded by greed that they destroyed themselves? Maybe it was over money, maybe over power. What happened to them? Share your experience in the comments. Sometimes telling the story is how we reclaim the power they tried to take from us. Because Jack and his mother were about to learn the hardest lesson of all that. When you build your life on exploitation, it takes only one truth to make the entire structure collapse. When I walked out of that cafe, I felt lighter than I had in years. The divorce papers were still unsigned, but it didn't matter. The moment I spoke the truth aloud, something broke inside of Jack and his mother. They had no more leverage, no more control. For once, I was the one holding all the cards. Jack trailed after me, his voice cracking. Amelia. Wait. We can work this out. We don't have to end things like this. His mother chimed in, desperate. Think of everything we've shared, the family we've been. I stopped on the sidewalk and turned to face them. The city hummed around us, traffic lights, blinking horns, blaring strangers walking by, unaware that the ruins of my marriage were scattering across the pavement. You want me to think of family? My voice shook, but not with fear, with fury that had waited far too long. Family doesn't drain your savings. Family doesn't insult your dying father. Family doesn't abandon you at the hospital when you're watching the only parent you have left fade away. Jack flinched, his mother's painted lips pressed tight. For once they had no clever retort, no demand, no threat. I walked away, and for the first time I didn't look back. The divorce process was swift after that. With the documents filed and the money moved, there wasn't much they could contest. The court recognized the $50,000 I had taken as marital property division, and the rest, my father's inheritance, remained entirely mine. Jack moved into a small rental with his mother. They had already burned through most of the cash they'd stolen before Hawaii, and the bills came crashing down fast. Credit card debts, unpaid rent, frivolous expenses, all of it piled on. Jack, who had once boasted about quitting his job, now scrambled to find work, but no one wanted to hire a man who had walked away from responsibility. His mother, used to living off him now, lived off nothing but bitterness and regret. Meanwhile, I sold the apartment Jack and I had once shared. Every room in that place was poisoned with memories of shouting, of loneliness, of betrayal. I moved into the home my father had left me, a space filled with his presence. His books lined the shelves, his scent lingered faintly in the walls, and for the first time in years I felt safe. Each morning I woke with gratitude instead of dread. I went to work not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I rebuilt my routines, filled my evenings with quiet joy, reading, cooking meals for myself sometimes, just sitting by the window and breathing. I was no longer a servant in my own life. I was free. And this is where I want to pause and ask you something. How do you define freedom? Is it money independence, peace of mind? For me, it was the moment I realized I could walk away from people who never valued me. Share your answer in the comments, because your definition of freedom might inspire someone else who feels trapped. Jack and his mother tried to call me at first. Long, rambling voicemails filled with accusations, guilt trips, even begging. I stopped listening after the first few. I blocked their numbers, blocked their emails, erased their presence from my life. And slowly the noise faded. They sank deeper into debt, forced to move into a rundown apartment far from the city center. Jack picked up odd jobs, his mother scowled at neighbors who no longer envied her. The world that had once revolved around their greed had shrunk to a single gray reality. As for me, I kept the promise I had made to my father. I chose happiness. I chose peace. And I finally understood that endurance is not strength when it chains you to misery. Strength is choosing to let go. When the dust finally settled, I began to see just how completely Jack and his mother had destroyed themselves. Their downfall was not sudden. It was slow, humiliating, and painfully public. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Jack's credit cards were maxed out from their luxury spending spree. He had financed first-class flights, expensive hotels, and designer clothes, while depending on money he assumed would always be there. When the bills arrived, they were suffocating. Collectors began calling, letters piled up, interest mounted, and with no job to pay them, Jack quickly sank. His mother, who once paraded through department stores with her head held high, now scrounged for coupons at grocery stores. She blamed him, of course, screamed at him for not marrying me properly, for not securing control of my inheritance. But the truth was, they had both gambled with my father's legacy and lost. Meanwhile, I thrived. I sold the condo Jack and I had shared, refusing to keep a single corner of space that reminded me of their cruelty. The proceeds added to my security. Then I moved into the apartment my father had left me, the home he had chosen with care, the place where he hoped I would feel safe. Walking through its doors for the first time alone, I felt his presence. The books on the shelves, the quiet strength in the walls, it was as though he was whispering, "You did the right thing." I breathed deeply and let the peace settle into me. For the first time in years, I lived on my own terms. I worked not because I was desperate to cover bills drained by others, but because I loved my career. I spent evenings cooking simple meals for myself, savoring the silence. I met friends for coffee, laughed freely, and even took short trips on weekends, small joys I hadn't allowed myself in years. Jack tried to reach out once more. His message was pitiful, filled with half-hearted apologies and promises that he would do better. I deleted it without a second thought. I had no interest in reopening wounds I had already healed. His mother didn't bother contacting me again. Her pride couldn't bear another rejection. Sometimes late at night I thought about the contrast. Jack and his mother crammed into a shabby apartment, weighed down by debt collectors, their days filled with regret. And me sitting quietly in my father's apartment, sipping tea, watching the city lights flicker below. The irony was cruel but fitting. They had dreamed of living like royalty on my father's money, but their greed left them with nothing. I had been their servant, But now I was the one living in freedom, in dignity. And here I want to ask you, have you ever seen karma come full circle? Have you witnessed someone who exploited others fall into the very trap they set? Share your story in the comments, because these reminders help us all see that justice has many forms. Looking back, I realized my father's greatest gift wasn't just the inheritance. It was his wisdom. His last words to me, "Don't endure. Choose happiness," echoed every time I doubted myself. He had given me the courage to see that sacrifice without respect is slavery, and that no amount of money or tradition should chain a person to misery. Jack and his mother thought they had broken me. They thought my silence was weakness, but silence can be strategy. And when the time came, I used their arrogance to free myself. Now, when I walk through the city, I feel lighter. I carry my father's lessons, not their cruelty. And I know one truth I wish I had learned sooner: love should never cost you your dignity. In the months after the divorce was finalized, the contrast between our lives became impossible to ignore. Jack and his mother had envisioned themselves as wealthy socialites, parading through high-end stores and posting pictures of expensive meals. But their fantasy ended the moment the money stopped flowing. Reality hit them like a storm. Jack had no job and no plan. He spent his days chasing interviews, but no company wanted to hire a man who had quit his last position without notice and carried mountains of debt. His mother, who once demanded luxury scarves and designer handbags, now argued with cashiers about grocery bills. They were forced to move into a rundown apartment with peeling wallpaper and noisy neighbors, a far cry from the luxury they once claimed as their birthright. Meanwhile, I felt reborn. I settled fully into the apartment my father had left me. Every corner of that home felt like a reminder of his care, his strength, his quiet faith that I would one day stand on my own. I decorated the living room with family photos, added flowers to the balcony, and filled the kitchen with the smell of home-cooked meals. For the first time, I lived in a space that was mine, untouched by greed or resentment. The weight of years of endurance lifted. I no longer woke up to criticism, demands, or endless chores. I no longer watched my bank account drain at someone else's whim. Instead, I began to make choices for myself, traveling on weekends, reconnecting with friends, rediscovering hobbies I had abandoned. Slowly, joy crept back into my days. One evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the city lights flickering below. For years, I had believed endurance was strength, that staying silent, sacrificing, and waiting for change was what made a marriage work. But my father had been right. Endurance without respect is nothing but slow destruction. Real strength is choosing freedom. Real love doesn't demand you give up your dignity. Jack and his mother became a cautionary tale in my mind. Their downfall was poetic. Blinded by greed, they had destroyed their own security. They tried to exploit me, but instead, they lost everything. And here's the truth: I didn't just escape them. I built something better. A life where my choices were mine alone. A life where my father's memory wasn't mocked, but honored. A life where peace replaced chaos. And before I close this chapter, let me ask you, what does happiness look like for you? Is it a quiet home? Financial independence? The courage to walk away from those who drain your spirit? Share your vision in the comments. I want to know what freedom means to you. Because for me, happiness is this: sitting in my father's apartment, breathing deeply, and knowing I chose myself. The story of Jack and his mother ended in bitterness and debt. But my real story began when I stopped enduring and started living. Life has a strange way of teaching us lessons we resist learning. For years, I told myself that love meant sacrifice, that marriage meant endurance, that family meant giving until there was nothing left. But losing my father and facing the truth about Jack and his mother forced me to see the reality I had been avoiding. I had given everything: my time, my savings, my energy, my loyalty. In return, I was treated as a servant, a bank account, a shadow in my own home. It took my father's final words to shake me awake. Don't endure. Choose happiness. Those words became my compass. Today I live differently. I still work, not because I must, but because I love what I do. I cook simple meals, take walks through the city, call friends without fear of being judged for spending time away from home. I sit by the window of the apartment my father left me, and instead of feeling trapped, I feel safe. I feel free. Sometimes memories creep in, the laughter of Jack and his mother, when they thought they had won the emptiness of nights spent alone while they enjoyed luxury on my dime. But those memories no longer hurt. They remind me of the strength it took to leave. If there is one lesson I want to leave with you, it is this. Love should never cost you your dignity. No inheritance, no marriage, no obligation is worth losing yourself. So I ask you, what chains are you ready to break? What freedom are you ready to claim? Tell me in the comments, and let's remind each other that no matter how deep the pain runs, choosing happiness is always possible. Because endings are never just endings. They are beginnings in disguise. And this is mine.